أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. To you all, thank you so much for joining us. I know there are about 32 of us here at the moment. I believe that there are over 100 who have registered, so we are expecting some more to join us. But we wanted to make sure that we were prompt in starting and ending. So inshallah, we will be starting now, and then we will hopefully ending at the scheduled time of 5 o'clock, depending upon where you are in the world. Just to introduce myself, my name is Babar Mirza. I am a head teacher in London at the Islamia Primary School. I am also the Director of Education for Nida Trust. Now, this Teachers Network webinar has been brought to you by Nida Trust. We are an organization we're actually celebrating our 15th anniversary or birthday next month, inshallah. And so we're an educational charity working to support teachers, young people and parents, and leaders, community leaders. The idea is to raise the aspiration and achievement of young people, particularly from disadvantaged backgrounds. Now, this series of webinars, the aim of which is to try and increase the knowledge and understanding of Muslim teachers in some of the areas that perhaps we don't always get an opportunity to develop. So this is not a webinar about English, maths, or science, or anything like that. And I know that there are other organizations that could perhaps deliver those sessions a lot better. What we're passionate about is the deeper meaning of education. And I think far too often, educators and teachers, particularly Muslim organizations, we don't get an opportunity to really think about education on a deeper level. So what we would like to do over the course of the many weeks, inshallah, that we will be having these webinars, and of course we're under very difficult circumstances, but we hope and pray that we'll be able to make this very difficult circumstance an opportunity. And this is an opportunity. I think this network has developed out of a difficult situation. So inshallah, we're making best of obviously a bad situation, but inshallah, I hope and pray, and we will see inshallah that actually we would have benefited greatly over the next few weeks. We've managed to already book the next 10 speakers over the next 10 weeks, and we're very excited about who we've managed to book. Some of them are academics, some of them are, consultants who really know about education. Some of them are, you can say, alims, if you like. What we want you to do is to really think about education philosophy, to think about education theory, about pedagogy, and also practice, of course. So we want these sessions to be really reflective, inshallah. And this webinar is part of a wider network. And I think for far too long, we've felt that this is something that's been lacking, not only within this country, but also abroad as well, is teachers, Muslim teachers coming together. We know that you will, of course, be part of other networks, and that's absolutely fine, and that's really good for your own professional development. But I think it's really important that we as Muslim teachers, wherever we may be teaching, whether we're primary, secondary, further education, lecturers, or whether you're homeschoolers or whether you're working in a supplementary school, wherever you're educating young people, we think it's really important we do come together and we're able to share some ideas and share certain understanding. One of the things that we did earlier on today, is that we met up with school networks from across the world. So from Australia to South Africa, Turkey, Pakistan, the Netherlands, and of course the UK. And it was really heartening to see that actually amongst that network, we were representing 10 regions. We had across 650 schools. And most importantly, what we were representing within that network was 175,000 children across the country, across the world, in fact, and not just the country. What we hope, and I know that there are many international guests here today, and it's a rising total, we're at 42 at the moment, is you've got teachers from around the world as well. And I think we can really share from different experiences. Our speaker, who I will introduce in a moment, spent most of his teaching career in the UK and recently returned back to where he was born in Australia. And I think we can really learn from the experiences of people around the world rather than being kind of confined to our own localities. And I hope that you will appreciate these being the aims of this network and ultimately this webinar, to be able to have an insight of education from different perspectives. And I hope and pray, inshallah, if we make the correct intention with, the month of Ramadan only, for us in the UK, only a few hours away, that inshallah, this act of listening to a webinar can be an act of ibadah, inshallah, and increasing our knowledge for the benefit not only of ourselves, but benefiting other people. And as I always say to my own staff, and a number of whom are here, is that you really are part of the best profession that there can possibly be. This is a prophetic tradition. You are teachers. And inshallah, so everything that you do, anything that you say or do, inshallah, can be an act of ibadah, inshallah. But of course, teachers need to develop as well, and that's what the purpose of this webinar is. Moving on, let's introduce to you our speaker, the first speaker of a lineup of 10 or 12 we will have over the next few weeks up until the summer holidays, inshallah. His name is Sulaiman Charles Neave. Yes, he is a revert to Islam, if you like, became Muslim in 2003. He's been teaching for 21 years and is an English language specialist, so that's the subject that he teaches. When he was in the UK, which was only last year, he was a deputy headmaster at the St. James Senior Boys School, and also has spent time in Kuwait. So he spent 2 years there as head of English in Kuwait. Founding member and trustee of Nida Trust since 2005. And as I said, he recently moved back with his family to Australia. I can't see why, probably the weather. Is now a leadership and learning consultant for education change makers. And I'm sure he'll talk a little bit more about that later on. The topic for this afternoon here in the UK is project-based learning online. And I know that him and his organization have produced some really innovative ways that we can really cope as part of this lockdown, and we can really make the most of learning opportunities online. So that's it from me. The way that this will work is that I'm going to pass over to Sulaiman shortly. We have disabled all the mics and also the chat. So anything that you type in the chat will simply go to myself or the speaker. There will be an opportunity for a short Q&A towards the end. I do apologize in advance that Sulaiman has said that it's quite a packed presentation, so there will not be a huge amount of time for questions. However, if you would like any questions to be answered during the course of this presentation, then please do write them in the chat box, and Sulaiman will answer those towards the end. Like I said at the beginning, we are aiming to end at 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock British summertime. So please do sit back, and I hope you enjoy the presentation. Over to you, Brother Sulaiman.
Jazakallah khairan, Babar. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thanks very much for joining me. It's a little past 1 o'clock in the morning here in Australia, so I'll do my best considering the time frame. In Australia, we always start with an acknowledgement, and we acknowledge the original owners and custodians of the country that we're in. So I will start traditionally today to acknowledge that profound contribution that the first Australians made to us, and pay respects to their elders and their elders present, past, and emerging. I'd also like to acknowledge Nida Trust and thank them very much for inviting me to talk to so many fantastic teachers from all around the world. At Education Change Makers, we were born in the burnt heart of Australia. And Dave Faulkner, our CEO, was the director of a region of Western Australia, which included around about 150 schools. The region was bigger than the UK. And what he found in that massive part of the Australian outback was the best place for change to be initiated, for effective change to happen, was within our schools, with teachers themselves. And this beautiful piece of artwork by Tristan Dougie, an Aboriginal artist, symbolizes that. It shows us in the middle, the orange campfire where we're sharing wisdom, where we're talking to each other. But then it also shows all around the edge these other campfires of tribes from around the nation. And we're bringing our wisdom from our tribes. You can see the little footprints walking into the main campfire, but then you can also see the track back to our own campfires. So what I really hope is today that you get a chance to actually take a little bit of wisdom, I hope, inshallah, from this presentation and take it back to your schools and just start thinking about how you might be making your education at your schools future ready, and how you might be thinking about perhaps project-based learning as an option to make your education future ready. So that's who we are. Check us out at www.educationchangemakers.com. We don't just work here in Australia. We've got contracts in Romania, Hawaii, Kentucky in the USA as well, New Zealand. So we're all over the place. Our chairman was also chaired the BET conference for the last 3 years, so he knows the UK well. And we love working with lots of different countries and different systems. I want to talk to you today about the future of education. And I'm going to start by just talking to you a little bit about the future. If you have a look at this brilliant quote from Ali radiallahu anhu, he says, "How foolish is man? He ruins the present by worrying about the future, but weeps in the future for the past." And that's a really important thing to understand, that actually as human beings, we're constantly looking at the past, the present, and the future. We can't just say, oh, we're just going to focus on the future, because there's some fantastic things that happened in our past. And there's some great things that are happening right now in our present that we don't want to just throw away. So when we're looking towards the future, we've got to make sure that we include all aspects, all the things that we've already learned, plus start to look at some really innovative things. This chap called Arthur Radabau was a futurist. He was an artist, and the New York, not New York Times, I think it was the New Yorker magazine, asked him to do some paintings of what he thought the future would look like. And this was in the early 1950s. And this is what he thought a factory would look like. If you have a look at a factory now, you get that same sort of idea. You've got robots creating cars. And if you have a look, we would say that this is a bit of a factory of the future, actually. This is the Tesla factory in Southern California. It's actually where they build the batteries. And the whole factory is automated from start to finish. There's not one human being working in that factory. There's just robots taking things from one component to the next component. And you can see how massive it is. It's something like 50 different football fields worth of space. They're even planning that it then gets loaded onto automatic trucks and taken out to the actual places where these factories get used. These batteries get used. Have a look at Arthur Radabau's version of the classroom back in the 1950s. Everybody's sitting there with screens in front of them with buttons to press. And of course, this is our classroom right now. And unfortunately, right now, our classrooms are even at home and our screens are at home. So it makes it even more challenging. But you can see that idea of the screen, of that personal learning experience being created, has already happened. You know, that's in our present right now. This is a bit of a vision of the future. This is the Louvre Museum in Paris, and this is VR. So essentially you can strap this VR onto you and you can go for a walk around the Louvre, and you can actually see the wonderful things that are going on, the beautiful artwork, etc. So this is a little vision of our future, particularly helpful during something like this in a lockdown. But actually, if you ever think of a kid, maybe in outback Australia or in the Gambia, in Africa, who may not have the opportunity to get to see such a wonderful place as this in Paris, it's so much cheaper and easier to then take them over some VR equipment and they actually get to have that same experience. It's the pace of change, though, isn't it, that is really challenging. And I think that's what sometimes worries people. It's not so much these individual little changes, but it's the fact that things are happening and changing so quickly that sometimes causes concerns. And I want you to consider that right now. That's an old microchip. And Thomas More talked a lot about how the development of microchips would occur across the ages. And it's no coincidence that you've got phones that had 500 meg, then 1 gig of storage, then 2, then 4, now it's 8, then 16. Now we're up to sort of 256 meg of storage. And what you've noticed throughout that whole time is that things, the power of computers are being doubled every 18 months. And that's what Thomas More actually predicted were going to happen. And it's a nice little close-up of a microchip. And one of the things that what that's called is exponential growth rather than linear growth. Things are doubling every certain amount of time. And in fact, we saw exponential growth, unfortunately, with the doubling of the cases of coronavirus recently. You saw that massive graph that goes straight up. And that's essentially what that difference is right now. And a lot of human advancements are occurring at an exponential rate. So that is very hard as a human being to sort of get your head around, this idea of exponential growth. So if I asked you how long would it take you to climb to the moon, if I said to you, right, okay, if you climb to the moon and you can do 1 meter every second, I wonder how long that would take. Well, I've worked it out. I went on the NASA website and I had a look, and it would actually take 12.2 years. So that is 1 meter per second, that same rate to get to the actual moon. Now that's a linear growth because you're growing at the same rate the whole way through. If I said to you, well, no, what if you climbed to the moon and the growth rate of your speed was exponential? So for example, you do 1 meter for the first second, but then you do 2 meters for the second second. You do 4 meters for the next second. You do 8 meters for the second after that, etc. That's an exponential growth. I wonder how long you would think it would take to get to the moon. I've always asked this question and people have said, oh, well, gosh, it'd be really quick. It might be a few weeks, a few days even. The incredible figure is that it would actually take 31.5 seconds. If you did an exponential growth. And the amazing thing about that is, of course, the whole second half of the journey happens in that last second because it's doubling every single time. And that's how we're changing right now as a human race, especially in regards to our use and our discovery of technology. And I think it's that pace of change that is particularly worrying for people, that they find difficult. So here's a couple of things just to blow your mind. The first one is we can cure some cancers right now. This is a drug called Kymriah, and it was developed at Johns Hopkins University. They're in the news an awful lot at the moment because they're doing a lot of the work on the pandemic. And what it does is it's developed for you personally, and it actually attaches to your cells, and it reads your DNA and it creates an attachment, which means that it can actually go into your cells and in fact cancer cells and kill them because it understands your personal DNA. And it costs $475,000 US per dose. But that's because we have to map the individual's genome so that you can then develop the drug. If you don't know what somebody's DNA actually is, you can't develop that drug for that person individually. Have a look at how much it cost to map a genome back in 2001. It cost $100 million. But if you look at Moore's law, you can see how that cost has dropped as technology has gone up. So now it costs around about $1,000 to map a genome. You know, anybody can send off to ancestry.co.uk or whatever and find where they came from originally and all that sort of stuff that you're seeing in the advertisements now. So the cost of mapping a genome has dropped significantly. So what you then find is that perhaps drugs like this in the future, you'll be able to get for $100 because of this incredible technological growth. The next one, just to blow your mind, is that robots don't suck anymore. And this is a lovely picture of a robot from, I think it was 2013, trying to put a box onto a tray. And you can see he struggles. He doesn't do a very good job. This one is a little bit more scary. This is from 2016, and this robot has been told to open the door no matter what. Get through that door, open the door. No matter what resistance you get through the door. That's all it's been programmed to do. So you can see the guy there trying to hold it back with a hockey stick, trying to stop it. The robot still keeps doing it, even though the man's trying to close the door, trying to push it back. The robot even works out how to put its leg through and then its sort of front head arm thing to try and get through. Even when the man's trying to pull it away from the door, it still fights him to try and get back and to try to do that. That's the one that worries me the most. That was back in 2016, that one. This is this year. Now have a look at the incredible movement that they've now managed to get. If you think back to that robot that couldn't even put the parcel on the shelf, now look at the balance. Look at, you could almost describe it as beauty in the way that it's dancing, in the way that it's actually moving and managing to stay upright. So this has all occurred literally within the space of 6 or 7 years. This ability to balance, to pivot like a ballerina has been developed in such a short amount of time. Fascinating and terrifying. That's the world that we're here in when it comes to education. We're all teachers and we're teaching young people, and that's their world that they're going to be coming up against over the coming years. A few statistics, and these are Australian statistics. They're from the Future of Young Australians, FYA report. Very interesting to have a look at. I'm sure they'll be very similar to the sorts of statistics that you get in the UK and the USA. 50% of jobs that the students that you're currently teaching right now won't have even been invented. So there's no way that you know what you're educating your students for. So this business that you've got to educate them with the skills that they will use in their job is actually irrelevant. They don't need to be taught what to do in a job because it's very likely that their job doesn't even exist yet. Most young people now over their career will have 17 different jobs, but more importantly, in 5 different industries. So not only will they be doing different things, going from one company to another, but they're going to be working in completely different industries. So as educators, we have to start thinking about what are we doing to prepare these young people for their futures, for these fascinating but terrifying futures. Of course, I'm talking very much about our education when it comes to knowledge and skills-based today. And I think Nida Trust in particular is going to be talking about other things, particularly their spiritual aspect and development over the next coming weeks with all of the other speakers that they've got lined up in the next 10 weeks. One of the ways, and this is what my talk was advertised as, one of the ways that we here at Education Changemakers think is the best to address this future-ready learning, if you like, is through what's called project-based learning. The Americans are really big on this. It happens in a lot of American schools. And since I came to Australia, I've also noticed it an awful lot here, especially in secondary schools, which is pretty impressive because it's hard to do at secondary schools. But there's quite a few state secondary schools I've worked with that are doing whole project-based learning units in Year 7 and Year 8 in particular. The Australians and the Americans aren't held back by the fantastic British GCSE, this qualification that everybody does when they're 16, but nobody quite knows why they're doing it. And so there isn't quite so much of the pressure to really focus in on learning things that you need to know for an exam when you're 16. So there is a little bit more freedom over here. But I wouldn't say that that should hold you back. When we go through PBL, just start thinking about, well, how could I make this work in my school? Because we truly believe that PBL is a great way of introducing students to the sorts of skills that they're going to need to know in their futures. And that's a basic description of what project-based learning actually is. It's all about this real world experience, about producing a project that is actually personally meaningful and actually relevant to the real world that they're in right now, in the present. It's not just kids building stuff. And I think a lot of people think PBL is, oh, you tell somebody to go off and build a coffee table and they come back again in a month and they've built a coffee table and you give them a mark. That's not what good project-based learning is. Some of the key aspects of it, and I'll take you through a design process for the rest of this presentation. So you're starting to get used to how perhaps you could design a project-based learning unit. But these are the key aspects. Students are given a driving question at the beginning. They learn across traditionally segregated curriculum subjects. So in some ways, it is a bit easier to deliver at junior schools, at primary schools, because then you often do have one teacher, perhaps teaching a multiple subject. So it's a little bit more easy to logistically deliver this sort of unit to young people. But as I said, I've seen lots of good examples in secondary schools as well. Students end up creating an artifact or a product as part of the process that addresses that original question. The product, by the way, could be a presentation, could be a speech. It doesn't always have to be something that they've actually made with their hands, because there are some students that's not their forte, and they would prefer to do something that's more presentation skills. It could be a fantastic report or an essay as well. So it doesn't always have to be something that they've actually built, but the product has to be authentically linked to the real world. And we'll talk about authenticity as I go through the design process. As I said, I'm going to take you through for the next 20 minutes or so, this design framework of how you would actually build a project-based learning unit. Sometimes you will hear it called problem-based learning because they get this driving question, this problem at the beginning that they're looking at solving. So it's a similar sort of process, except in project-based learning, there is a real focus on this authentic outcome at the end, this product that's actually produced at the end. You start designing by looking at your learning outcomes, your objectives, your aims, and they can come from the national curriculum. That's fine. It's not sort of, oh, you've got to go off and do something completely different. You do have to begin by looking at these key learning outcomes about what you want your students to actually learn. Part of those learning outcomes should also be what we call in Australia 21st century skills, but they've got lots of soft skills, you could call them. They've got lots of different names, things like communication, collaboration, critical thinking, creativity, the 4 C's we call it over here. So part of your learning objectives could be to make sure that you're teaching your youngsters collaboration skills, as well as they're learning about the journey of Christopher Columbus to the New World. So there could be 2 aspects of your learning objectives, and one of them should be these 21st century skills. And as I mentioned, the next stage, it's actually step 8. So you look at the end, and it's always good to design by looking at the end, is the public product. And you have to consider what it is that you actually want to create. So a little break from me. This lady's called Laura McBain. She's head of High Tech High, which is in California. Google it, look it up. It's this pretty awesome school where their whole curriculum is actually done around project-based learning. And she's talking about what does an actual end product look like in project-based learning.
Gosh, there's so many interesting projects that I've seen that allow students to kind of really, the first thing I think regardless is where the work's going to live. I think when you think about first of a primary project, secondary project, or senior project, they have to live someplace beyond the school. I've seen some beautiful topography maps of San Diego, of students creating these really 3D maps on laser cut that no one has ever made before. And that is epic, and it's interesting, and it's three-dimensional, and it's got texture, and it's fun to touch. And the students are designing that, but it lives in a place that's public. Another great project I've seen, one of my colleagues has created this beautiful 8th grade project where students are creating this massive wall of physics, where the students have to create a ball and has to go through multiple series of mechanics in order to get through it. But it wasn't just one student's project, it was a massive wall that connected each project together. So the entire machine worked as an entire system. And it was amazing. It was disruptive throughout the school because people wanted to know what it was and they wanted to know how to work it. And I've also seen beautiful projects that are as simple as creating a book that's published, that students now are self-published authors. So I think when we're thinking about projects, it's less about what it is, it's more about where it goes and who is the audience, and how do I design a project that lives beyond the school, but lives in the community. And you can do that with art, you can do that with physics, you can do that with engineering, you can do it with books. But the question is, who is the audience, and how do I let my students know that their work is gonna live beyond this 45-minute classroom period?
So you can see just how empowering it is for a student to be able to create a piece of work that's going to live beyond the school. And it's this sort of idea for future-ready learning that we've got to be confronting ourselves as teachers. You know, how many times does a student do work for you that they hand into you, you look at, you hand it back to them, and then it just goes in the bin? What was the point of that work? We need to be thinking really carefully about giving the students work that will actually live beyond the school, not even within the school, not even on a display in the school corridor, but actually beyond the school, because that's when you get real power in this sort of learning. Once you've decided on those learning objectives and you start to get an idea of what your public product might actually be linked to those learning objectives, it's then time to design your challenging problem or question. And this is why I said earlier that it could be called problem-based learning, because you give them this question at the beginning and that their projects have to be linked to this question. Within this question, the student has to have a real life role. They need to know what they need to do, and they get taught what they need to know. So project-based learning isn't just independent learning. It's not just saying to students, you've got to go out and find out everything for yourself. There is teaching in there. So your question has to include your knowledge of, well, this means I'm going to have to teach them this particular unit or this aspect. And finally, number 3, there is a purpose for the public product. So let's have a look at an example. I think the best way of looking at it is through an example. As a member of a local council in a remote community in Australia, develop a solution for water saving to be presented at the next council meeting. This would be the sort of driving question that you could provide to a student. And you can see in there, you've got a role. The student has a role. They are a member of a local council. This is a real life role, something that actually exists in their community, and they're playing that role. They're playing that part. They are having to learn something. They're having to find out about something, a solution for water saving. They're having to come up with that themselves, something to actually do. And of course, it involves some teaching. You're going to have to teach them about why is water saving important and various aspects and ways of saving water. And finally, the public product in this case isn't building anything, but it's actually creating a presentation for a council meeting. So that presentation has to be properly managed, and it has to be authentic. It has to be done in a way which actually works and which is realistic. Within that question, and with any question as well, number 3 is you also must include some sort of student voice, some sort of choice within this question. It can't just be you're doing just this. There has to be an aspect of choice. So with the previous question, you had the idea of a way of saving water. That's their choice. They can look it up and they can decide what it is that they actually want to do. This is another one that a school's used, pretty awesome one, as a sportswear designer for Adidas. So there's your role. Design a new football boot for a partially sighted player and present the design to an audience of the partially sighted. So they have to look at, well, how am I going to design this? But also, how am I then going to present that design to partially sighted people. I can't use PowerPoint because they can't see it. So that's the student choice, student voice of how am I going to do it? Not just what do I have to do, that's your question, but how am I actually going to do it? And it gives students a real opportunity to come up with that choice. Step 4, and don't worry, there's a slide at the end with all of the steps, so you won't forget. And we're certainly going to share that with you all once we come to emailing out to the distribution list at the end of this presentation. But step 4 is sustained inquiry. And essentially, sustained inquiry is the learning that they're going to have to do. So for the water management one, they have to learn about the water management. They have to learn about disabilities. For the question about designing the footwear. And they have to learn about presentation techniques for both of those. So there's lots of learning that has to take place. And when you're designing a project-based learning unit, you should be thinking, well, what do I actually have to teach them? What do my students need to learn? Because some of that will have to be direct teaching by me. Some of it could be flipped learning, where they learn it at home, watching on a YouTube clip or whatever you prepare for them, and then they come in and they start working on it in the classroom. That's always pretty awesome, flipped learning. But some of it will have to be still that traditional. They sit down, you deliver them some information for 20 minutes, just like I am to you now, and then they go away and they start working on it. So PBL doesn't mean that you stop teaching. There's still an awful lot of teaching involved in PBL because there's a lot of things that your students still need to know. This is a great opportunity for remote and online learning in this current crisis. As I mentioned, flipped learning already, but there's also a lot of collaboration that can be included in this, this phase of PBL, this sustained inquiry phase, because students can learn together, and you can use these sorts of platforms like Teams or Zoom meetings with the Zoom breakout feature. And that can be one of the things that they really do, and they can collaborate and learn things together. And even if they don't have online capability, we're talking to some schools, representatives of schools Babar mentioned earlier, from countries where everybody doesn't just get online and learn. There's still a lot of directed self-study that they can do when they are at home. It doesn't have to always be on the computer. There are still libraries in the world, and you can go in and you can look things up as well. So there's a real opportunity for that as well. The next step that I would say is authenticity. Authenticity is all about making that student's role Googleable, if you like. You've got to ask them to produce a public product that is actually needed in the public. And you should be using authentic community members. So that water saving presentation, for example, I know they're not really going to be presenting it to the council, but perhaps you could get 2 or 3 council members into school. Perhaps you could do an excursion to your local council chamber. I remember taking my kids at St. James Senior Boys School to Staines Council for a fantastic public speaking competition that was run there. And as soon as they walked into the chamber and they saw where they were actually going to be sitting, and they were going to be using the proper microphones, and they were going to be doing it properly, you could see the whole mood lift. They thought, wow, this means something. This is actually meaningful. I'm actually doing something real here. And so that's a great thing to do. Make sure that there's real authenticity. When it comes to working in the community, this could be also done online, searching for various charities perhaps that are working in your community right now, delivering food to perhaps the elderly who can't get out of their house to go to the supermarket. That could be part of a project-based learning unit. And working in the community, that authentic work with the community is so important. So there are some real online learning opportunities that are involved in PBL work. My company's recently put together this website called keepinglearninggoing.com. Doesn't have the www, just https keepinglearninggoing.com. Check it out. It's all free, actually. So it's very Australian. It's got a bit of an Australian context, but do have a look at it. You can download the toolkits there for free. You just have to give us your email address, etc. Or if you don't want to do that, you can even go to the next page and actually just look at all of the toolkits for free online. There's advice for teachers, some of the things that teachers can do while you're in this remote learning cycle. There's advice for school leaders, and there's also advice for parents as well that you can share with your parents at your school. There's even a diagnostic tool for school leaders as well. So if school leaders want to get a basic idea of where their school's at in the current crisis when it comes to online and remote learning, we can run the diagnostic tool for you as well. And of course, as I said, it's all free of charge. So check out that website. That's what it looks like just there. Okay, we're in the home run now, and I'll take some questions soon. But the next point is reflection. As part of a really good project-based learning unit, you have to include some opportunities for reflection for your students. And this is ongoing reflection, where they're looking at what they're doing and they're judging, is it successful? What am I learning? How am I learning it? It's really important to include that. And there are so many different ways. I didn't include them in this particular PowerPoint because I knew it was quite a quick one, but there are lots of different ways. You can get them the basic ways of writing a journal. You could have exit tickets as they leave the classroom, where they actually have to fill in what they've learned for the day. You can have online blogs as well. That's a great way of doing some reflection. One school that I worked with recently did all of their reflection on video. So the kids went home and they just took a little video of themselves, a 5-minute video of themselves, just talking about what they learned in that particular day. So as long as your project-based learning unit includes some reflection, that's just such a really important bit. And it's important to understand why that's different to critique and revision. Reflection is personal. Critique and revision has to include your peers or the teacher or even members of the community. It can be that final assessment. So right at the end, when they've actually produced their product, who's going to critique it? Who's going to tell them what they did well and what they could have improved? But it should also be ongoing as well. There should also be some aspect where they're getting essentially formative assessment all the way through this project-based learning unit. And you can see how in PBL, so much of it is just good teaching practice. I'm sure you're all doing formative assessment anyway as part of your units, normal units of work. But PBL gives a real opportunity to map and to assess your assessment and the students' responses to that assessment. If they're working on something that goes over a period of weeks, then when you actually give them that formative assessment or critique, as we would call it, you can then see if they respond to it. Sometimes our problem as teachers is that we'll teach a unit of work, they'll finish that unit of work, and then you'll give them some formative assessment at the end of the unit of work. But then you won't go back and reassess it to see if they've actually taken that formative assessment in. It might not be till the end of year test or the end of unit test in another 4 weeks before you see if they've actually noticed that formative assessment that you gave them. So with this constant process of critique and revision that you design into a project-based learning unit, you can make sure that they're actually listening to your assessment or to their peers' assessment can work really, really well, or even some self-assessment as part of the reflection process. So getting that cycle working is so important. And finally, it's the public product. As I said, that was step 8. So you get through to that final step, which is what are they actually going to produce to show to people? What is this final public product that they're going to actually show? And there's so many good examples, as Laura said before. Another example from one of my colleagues that he did was they were sitting in a classroom. I think it was a year 4 classroom. He's a primary teacher. And they were looking out the window at the bird life that was in the trees. And one of the boys in his class said, oh, why don't we make some bird boxes? And that was the public product. That's what I mean by almost starting with that at the end. That was something that one of the boys said he wanted to do. And so then he designed out a whole project-based learning unit around those bird boxes. But of course that meant looking at the ecosystem. It meant studying those particular birds, doing a project on those particular birds and actually presenting that as part of their learning. So everything built up to that final stage, which was for their parents and for the local communities to come in and to look at these bird boxes, that final public product. So that's it. I'm not sure if you can see that because my face is over a couple of those boxes, but they're the 8 steps for project-based learning. The steps we use come from a group called pblworks.org. So you're very welcome just to go and find them, and they will give you the same steps. This is the same program that you can actually have a look at. They will also give you even more examples that I haven't given you today from various schools as well, and we'll send that out to you as well. So inshallah, you found that helpful and a way of responding to the challenges that we all face as educators, and these challenges about getting our students future ready, making sure that they're ready for this world that we're all going into. So have a think about how perhaps project-based learning could work at your school. I will now just stop screen sharing for a moment, and I will start to have a look at the chat, and I should be able to answer any questions. So the first question that I've been asked is, what is the time frame that you would advise for PBL to be successful? Is it possible to be done over 2 weeks? I think that would depend greatly on your learning objectives. That's what it comes down to. 2 weeks to me does sound a bit short, but you know, if it's a year 2 class, then perhaps that is the capacity. But I think if it's any older than that, 2 weeks does sound a little bit too short. However, if there's one really simple learning objective and you think that you could create something that could be, as I said, a good, authentic public product, and it's the role that the students are taking on is sort of Googleable, then you could get it done. I don't know how often you see them in 2 weeks. Again, if you're a primary teacher and you're with them all day, every day for 2 weeks, or sort of online back and forth with them for 2 weeks, then perhaps it could work. Good. Next question to me is, the issue is the number of students and the time, and usually teachers lack the time to put this into practice. So many ideas for teachers, but limited time. We always get that, and you're absolutely right. We do have limited time, but I suppose the slightly provocative question that I would put back to you is, well, what's more important? Is it worth spending the time to make sure that you are providing learning that is properly preparing these students for the future? I think that's the question. And yes, that will be a negotiation with your executive team, with your school leadership, saying, you know, you've got to carve out a bit of time so we can design something here that is really, really good. And I think that is a negotiation, and it is always challenging, especially at the moment when everybody's scrambling to get this online learning done and all this sort of stuff. It's tough. It's really tough. But it does come down to priorities. You can find time if there is a priority. Do you have summative assessment? Are there exams? Do you have standardized qualifications? Well, I think no would be my answer. I think your final critique and your final public product can certainly be assessed. But what we're finding here in Australia, and what America is finding, and a lot of other countries, is that this system of exams is starting to become quite outdated. I mean, if people will always give me the argument of, well, what about university entry? It's really interesting that if you put in a UCAS application that doesn't have any exam results, if you put in an application to a university with no formal assessment, the admissions tutor at the university, on average, will take 33 minutes to look at your application. If you put in a standard UCAS application that has exam results, the admissions tutor at a university on average takes 8.5 minutes to look at your application. Now, I know I'd rather an admissions tutor spending 30 minutes on my kids. So, you know, why are we going through this system of formalized exams? Why not just apply directly to the university and prove what we've learned with a portfolio? There's almost every university now will accept that. There's no universities out there saying, oh, we have to have A-levels grades. We have to have GCSEs. It's one of the big misnomers. England is a little bit behind some of the other countries, But it's one of the big sort of things that has been put out there that isn't actually true. Universities will happily accept students that haven't done exams. So I think if we are designing all of our learning around examinations, then we're not preparing students for the future. Bit controversial, just what I'm saying. Have a think about it. You know, argue about it with your other colleagues as well. Next question. How can secondary school teachers implement PBL with a curriculum to follow? Well, as I said, do begin with looking at the learning objectives, because you can still follow that curriculum. You can still deliver those learning objectives through a project. I mean, science really springs to mind. She mentioned physics, year 8, looking at mechanics, levers, etc., creating this incredible project. But biology, growing things, you know, there's so many things that actually already happen a little bit in science, but there's a lot of potential. The really exciting projects are the ones that can join these segregated subjects. So the humanities, you can definitely do this. You can definitely have a look at it. And it's often about giving yourself a concept to focus on across departments rather than the topics. So let's say you give yourself a concept like justice. And when you read Shakespeare's Macbeth, you look at you always refer back to this aspect of justice. How is justice? And if you're worried again about preparing them for the exam, there's almost certainly going to be a question. One of the themes is going to be justice. So they're learning that theme anyway. But then you could also talk to the history teacher and say, well, how does this concept of justice, how is this brought up in history? How's concept of justice brought up in geography? Perhaps there's issues to do with the environment. Are we being just to the environment? So then you could get 3, maybe 4 different departments all working together around a centralized concept. Once you've decided on what that centralized concept is, you can then decide on what your public product will be. So what sort of public product could you have when it came to justice? Could it be some sort of school parliament that you set up? Is that the public product? And you can show how justice can be created within some sort of school parliament democratic system, a just way of ruling. Could you look at the original way that the Prophet ﷺ ruled and the way justice existed in his society, and then relate that back to perhaps some of the texts that you're reading, or some of the actual curriculum that you have to cover as part of the national curriculum. So that's how I would do it. If I was in secondary, I'd be looking at overarching themes and trying to link them. So you're still doing that work. You know, you're still in history, you're still looking at the sources that you need to look at. In English, you're still reading Macbeth, but you've managed to link it with an idea and with some sort of public product at the end. A question here, just more relevant directly to COVID-19 and coronavirus and this current lockdown. I suppose why I thought this presentation was relevant at the moment is that we are in this incredibly creative space right now. We're in a space where we've actually become a little bit freer in what we're able to achieve with our learning, because nobody is going to hold it against you if you didn't do everything exactly as it was going to be done had there been face-to-face school. So what I would say is that this is the perfect opportunity to produce some sort of project-based learning, to do some really good collaborative work with your colleagues, to make a decision about what this public product could be. And it could be a presentation online. It could be something that they've done at home. You know, public product could be some sort of baking product that they do with their parents, you know. So all of these sorts of things, you now have this tremendous opportunity to actually give it a go. Of course, the first few weeks, people were rightfully panicking a bit and struggling and just trying to make sure that the kids at the school had something to do. But now we're into this period where the lockdown could be extended for another month or so, at least. In Australia, some states are finishing in a couple of weeks. My state probably will go through to June. You've got this big stretch of learning. You've got the basic units that you know you were supposed to have done if you were still at school. you have to redesign them anyway because you're putting it online. So now you've got this opportunity to think, well, when I redesign this for online, perhaps I want to explore this idea of project-based learning. Perhaps there needs to be some sort of project at the end of it that they can actually present and show everybody else. So to the answer, why is this relevant to COVID-19? I think that's the best answer, that you've actually got an opportunity now to explore some of these different types of learning. Final question. Do I agree that child-led learning simply does not work? Professor David Geary. Project-based learning is very different to child-led learning. That's the first point I would like to make. And I hope I made that clear in the sustained inquiry section of this presentation, where I was at pains to point out that this is not a way of not teaching. You know, there is still a lot of content that you will have to deliver to the students, sometimes in still quite a traditional way. But other ways, maybe you can look at flipped learning or whatever, but that's still you leading the learning. I think the problem with child-led learning before is that what has happened is that people have said, right, go off and learn about this. I'll come back in 3 weeks and check how you did. You know, that never works. Students, in my experience anyway, and I haven't studied this area, I'm not an academic, so I'm just speaking from my experience as a teacher. In my experience, that students excel when they're given really clear structures, routines, scaffold. So in that sense, you need to give them, if you want them to lead their own learning, there has to be a scaffold on which to hang that learning, on which to hang their own little learning journeys as children. So I think that's how I would approach that, is that yes, there should be part of the sustained inquiry process in PBL is them finding out stuff themselves and actually doing the learning themselves, but you must give them the scaffold around of that. Part of that also goes right back to the beginning where I mentioned those 21st century skills. That's a 21st century skill that they'll need to learn anyway. How do you research something? How do you find out about something? So that they're the sorts of things you still have to teach them, but you can have opportunities of that sort of what may be called child-led learning. And as long as you scaffold that for them, I think it still can be quite effective, would be my answer to that. Jazakallah khairan, everybody. Apologies, I won't be able to take any more questions because we are going to keep this snappy and really on time. But you're very, very welcome to make contact with me via email. It is 2 o'clock in the morning though, so I may not respond straight away. I might get a little bit of sleep before Sehri. I think I've got about 2.5 hours, but I will definitely get back to you in the fullness of time. Jazakallah khair.
Okay, Jazakallah khair, Brother Sulaiman, in the early hours of the morning, providing us with professional development. May Allah accept it from you on the first day of Ramadan, inshallah. Now, just to say that the slides that have been presented here this afternoon will be shared via the network. And I appreciate that the marvel of social media means that actually we can share links far quicker than sometimes sending emails. So some of you may be here as a result of being invited by a colleague or a friend via a link, but we ask that you please register through the official channels, which is by emailing at info@nidatrust.org.uk. I put that in the chat. And that way you ensure that you get the updates, and also the slides that we'll be sending out, that we will send them via the mailing list, inshallah. So thank you very much again, Brother Sulaiman. Next week, we have Ustad Idris Khamisa, all the way from South Africa. He's actually in the, I was going to say he's in the audience, but he is in the audience. And he's going to be talking about rethinking schooling in the wake of COVID-19. And I thought, when I spotted him in the audience, I said to him, okay, wouldn't it be a good idea if you can provide a 1 or 2 minute synopsis, just to kind of encourage you to join us next week, inshallah. So I'm going to unmute just for a minute, please, 60 seconds, and then we will end. Over to you, Haji Idris.
Assalamu alaikum. I like it. So nice to see all of you. Alhamdulillah. I think Sulaiman's presentation very, very coherent. I think it was an excellent precursor to my own presentation. In terms of COVID-19, this is really unprecedented times. The challenges people are finding, schools, students, the home, it is going to change our landscape irreversibly. It's an opportune time for us to reflect on who we are, what we are doing at schools, what is relevant, what is not relevant. And this is, so I'm going to share, inshallah, some ideas in terms of how we should revolutionize our schools. I always believe our schools need to be a place of creativity, where we unleash people, unleash the creativity of our learners. It's not about focusing solely on academic aspects and preparing them for a particular profession. It's about developing them in such a way that there could be servant leaders, there could be dynamic players there, empowered, that they love the deen of Islam. And in the end, we got to look at how relevant we are at the moment. It's not trying to diminish any one of us, but to make sure that we are far more dynamic in terms of what we do and how we go about doing things. That's my 1 minute word. Jazakumullah. Assalamu alaikum. And I like it. So good to see so many familiar faces there, right? I'm still dashing and handsome, right? How's it?
MashaAllah. Jazakumullah khair. Thank you so much, Ustad Idris Khamisa, all the way from South Africa. That's next week. So please join us again at the same time, which is 4 o'clock British summer time, for 1 hour next week, inshallah. I know it's just a few hours away from the start of Ramadan in the UK, so I'll just wish you a Ramadan Mubarak, inshallah, and may Allah accept all of our fasting and our ibadah during this blessed month, inshallah. And of course, I pray Allah keeps all of you safe during this difficult time, inshallah. Jazakum Allah khair again. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.